Hello and welcome to Tea with Jess. I'm Jess Montgomery and I'm the author of the Kinship Historical Mystery Series. And as one of my characters likes to say, life is hard, have tea. So my mug today is my Tea with Jess mug. And I'm very excited to take my tea break today with a fellow writer and a friend, Meredith Doench. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before I bring her on. She's the author of the Luce Hansen thriller series from Bold Stroke Books. Crossed is the first in the series, and it was published in August of 2015 and was a runner-up for the 2015 Indie Fab Awards in the mystery genre. The next two in the series are Forsaken Trust and Deadeye, both of which were Mystery Thriller Goldie Award finalists in their respective years from Golden Crown Literary Society. Whereabouts Unknown is Meredith's fourth thriller and this time a standalone novel, and it releases March 1st of this year, so just a little under a month, available for pre-order. But it releases March 1st from publisher Bold Strokes Books and then becomes available March 15th from all retailers. So Meredith is a member of the Golden Crown Literary Society, Sisters in Crime, and Mystery Writers of America, where she also serves as a board member for Mystery Writers of America Midwest region. And side note, roped me in as well, which has been a lot of fun. And Meredith lives in Dayton, Ohio, where she is senior lecturer of creative writing, literature, and composition at the University of Dayton. So Meredith is quite accomplished, but today we're going to talk about her most recent accomplishment, her upcoming novel, Whereabouts Unknown. So now let's welcome Meredith.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks so much for
Hi. Oh, my pleasure. It's good to see you, even if, virtually.
Yep,
So,
absolutely.
absolutely. So, tell us first about just an overall, without spoilers, summary of Whereabouts Unknown.
All right. Well, Whereabouts Unknown has a lot going on. This is a
Mhm.
standalone, which I envision to be a standalone, of a new character for me named Theodora Matson, who is
Mhm.
a homicide detective for the city of Dayton, Ohio. And when the book opens, she's sort of in the prime of her life. Like everything's going awesome. She's 53 and she's kind of like at the height of her career. She's worked really great cases, solved some really great ones. She's in great physical shape. She's an athlete, so she's in great physical condition. She has been in a long-term relationship with her partner Bree, and they're getting ready to have their first child. And when the book opens, she's working a cold case of a missing teen from Dayton, and she is just simply going on like a routine follow-up call regarding the cold case, and she's injured pretty severely, so much so that it's questionable whether she's going to be able to keep working and be able to continue with that. And so over the course of her sort of rehabbing, she's working desk duty and things in her department, and comes across some information about another teen who has gone missing in Brecksville, Ohio, which is up in the Cleveland area, under very similar circumstances. So she starts to kind of work that, put it together, working the case, and she starts to believe that it's possible that these two teens could still be alive. And if that's the case, then they're in danger and they need to be found. And so that sort of kicks it off. But I also have a second point of view in the book too. So we're following Theo, kind of her line of trying to find him. But then the other voice is also Annabelle Jackson, who is a 16-year-old. She's the one from Burkesville who's gone missing. And so we hear about her. I hate to call it like a captivity narrative, but in a lot of ways, kind of what it is. And how she got to where she is and why she's there and all of those things, and how she works to hopefully save herself. So,
Yeah, it's harrowing. And that
oh,
opening scene is very like, yeah,
yeah.
this is a page turning book, people. I'm just
Oh,
saying.
well, thank you. Thank
And
you.
that's a great description of it. And I meant to point out, we have the cover, and the
I just got them. Oh wait, sorry. Let
yeah,
me get this.
yes.
I
Just
just got a box.
you just got your box. Oh, it's a beautiful cover. For people who are listening to the podcast version later, it's the title "Whereabouts Unknown" is in red on top of this very entrancing sort of gray and white, landscape that just, but it pulls you in, and you're like, yeah, it's a great cover, great opening.
Thanks. I really envisioned like when Bold Strokes Books was working on the cover, I really felt like it needed to be a black and white picture.
Mhm.
And there's a couple of I mean there's three different places really that keep coming up in the book. One is Dayton because that's where, the homicide detective works. But there's also Brecksville, and then there's also this area near Mansfield, um, which is settled like right next to um, a park, and so there's all of this wooded area, and that's what
Mhm.
this picture was kind of what I kept thinking about for that area that I was writing about. So yeah.
Well, you brought it to life. So yeah, you've described to us that your new detective Theodora
Mhm.
is a detective for the Dayton Police Department. In your series, Luce is an Ohio Bureau of Crime Investigations agent. So I'm wondering what draws you to writing crime, and in particular, fairly gritty police procedurals.
Yeah,
What
I
drew you
do
to
think
that?
I think this one's probably my grittiest.
Hmm.
I so when I first wanted, like from the very beginning, when I first wanted to be a writer when I was a teen, I wanted to be a horror writer. And I was bound and determined, like, I am going to write horror all the way through school and everything. And it wasn't until, you know, like I was maybe 2 years into my graduate program that I started to like say, oh, working with law enforcement and working that angle of crime fiction is a really cool way to get into these ideas of justice, which is ultimately, I
Mhm.
think, what I was really getting at in a lot of my horror. Um, but I do think like my horror elements seem to come through quite a bit in this novel. Yeah, they do.
And they do. And I know you well enough to know you're a very kind, sweet person. But I kind of love that, like, wow, she's always so polite and kind and sweet. And wow, I think that's awesome.
Well, thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
so I get asked all the time about the challenges of researching historical um, settings and eras for my novels, but I'm really intrigued. I think you have just as hard or a harder job researching police procedurals. So how do you do ride-alongs? Do you interview cops? How do you go about doing your research?
I've done a lot of ride-alongs. For this particular book, we were in the middle of the pandemic. I started this
Mm,
in 2019, and I mean, pretty rapidly we were, closing down and going into the, pandemic. So a lot of my stuff had to be virtual for this one, and
mm,
I am so blessed because two friends that I went to elementary school with, which is crazy to think that that was that long ago, but they both live in Dayton, and one of them is an ex-cop who used to work sex crimes, and the other is a mortician at one of our at Wright State University.
hmm,
And so they have been so amazingly fantastic because for this book I needed to know a lot about I hate to, I, there's I'm trying really hard not to give much away, but I needed a lot of information about sort of like someone who is captive, what would happen with their bodies, especially in heat,
mm,
maybe
mhm.
if they died, what might happen. So there was a lot of information about like what happens with bodies and how they decompose that I needed to know. And my friend who's a
Wow.
mortician was more than happy to give me details. Really, like, we had some conversations that went, oh God, and she spared no detail. I was like, oh
That's awesome.
yeah, it was very helpful. Yeah, at first I was really hoping I could go to work with her. And she kept saying like after the pandemic maybe you can. But, after some of our discussions, I don't know if I want
It's
to.
like, maybe not.
Yeah, I don't know. But, my other friend, who's an ex-cop, she was really helpful in determining, sort of like what would happen who's to a cop who's on, like, a medical leave, what would happen with them coming back to the job, how would they be integrated back into, like, who would take over for them? Like, there were a lot of questions that I needed that were just logistical like that, um, just to see how believable it could be. And there's also this whole feeling throughout the book that you're not really sure if, the main characters or if Theo is ever going to fully recover. And
Mhm.
so I needed some information about what would happen to a really decorated detective that if they were injured and couldn't work anymore, what would happen? Would they be fired? So she was really helpful with things like that, and giving me some really good details about entering properties and things like that. So it was very, very helpful. I also have a really great editor who I think she just does an amazing job working with crime fiction and knowing the law and the logistics of everything. She's wonderful at bold strokes. So
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah.
That's great. So you switched things up a bit because you went from a series to a standalone.
Hmm.
What you think is a standalone.
Hmm.
Sometimes these things change,
Yeah,
but you wrote it as a standalone.
I did. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about why. Tell us a little bit about the challenges and the joys of the two approaches.
Well, so Luz Hansen, that series that I was working on, that she'd been with me for so long. I mean, I started writing that character. I first started like envisioning it and started writing it probably around 2010, and it just felt to me like we had been together for so long. And also, I think it felt really personal too because it was all written in first person. And
Mhm.
so I just felt a little stifled by her, I think. And after
You need
three
to take a
books,
break.
I needed a break. Yeah, I needed a break after three books. And you know, she had a lot of like psychological issues that kind of hindered her.
Mhm,
And so I
mhm.
really wanted to take a look at from a different angle, of a police officer who's working and kind of get a different angle on the way that it works and all of that. I really felt too that, so this is going to sound crazy because this book sort of fits right in with that. But originally I was thinking that I felt a little hemmed in a little bit because Luz Hansen's job is to capture, she tracks serial killers for the state of Ohio. And so I felt like I was really limited and had to be held into this idea that everything had to be a serial killer. Well, this one sort of ended up that pathway too, but I think I have this thing with serial killers, and they're just
It's
sort
that
of
horror element again.
they're just there all the time.
Well, Ohio,
Yeah.
land of serial killers. I mean,
Hotbed of serial killers here. Yeah.
and we're also very friendly.
Yes. Yeah.
Midwest nice does not necessarily mean that, we're all serial killers, but there are some famous serial killers from Ohio for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
And you mentioned that Luce has some psychological issues. In your first book, Crossed, she's investigating a case that she hopes might lead her to working with the FBI, but it also
Mhm.
forces her to kind of confront an ex-gay ministry, what some people call conversion therapy,
Yep.
that tortured her as a youth and continues to haunt her. Um, and both women are lesbian and have relationships that are strong and committed. You talked about how Theodora and her partner Bree are hoping to have their first child. So diverse representation, it's obvious to say it's important in writing, and it's important that readers read literature about characters that are different than themselves, that they read about diverse people. But I think that's been a challenge for writers and for readers for a long time. But are you finding that now you're getting readers from like all demographics? Do you think that's opening up a bit?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When my first book came out, I was a little hesitant to tell some of my neighbors what my books were about, like
Oh,
they'd be really curious. And when I would start to tell them, they'd be like, oh, when I would say that they were queer characters or whatever, some were a little, but now that, I mean, I'm finding I get surprised usually every time that I do like workshops or readings where people who I would think would never be interested in any way of reading my books are the ones who actually come up and say, I really like this. Tell me more about this. And
mhm,
so I find that really awesome that that's happening. And plus, in crime fiction, we've had this explosion like in the last, well, just first of all, crime fiction has blown up enormously in the last probably, it seems to me like the last 5 years have been really great for crime fiction and so many different writers, but in particular, LGBTQ representation and writers and also characters. It has been a huge growth in that. I think one of the things that I wanted to do with this book, because some of my other ones, I mean, they really had, like, especially the one that you mentioned, Crossed, it really focused on this idea of like the ex gay ministries and the
mhm,
damage that it does. So there was a lot of focus in that particular book on my character being lesbian. And in this one, it's really not so much about, I mean, she just is. There's not a
mhm,
lot of talk about that. But what really wanted to get into in this one, I think, was just this idea of disability and the way that bodies can heal or possibly not heal,
mhm.
and or how a body can sort of maneuver around a physical issue to get to what they need to get to. So that's the kind of diversity I think that I was thinking about most with this book. um yeah, so I mean, that's really where my focus was. I have an article coming out in Crime Reads in March about disability and crime fiction and
Nice.
the lack of it. Yeah. So,
Yeah, and that's true. There is a lack of that representation.
yeah,
So,
I mean, one of the biggest things, frustrations for me was that in 2017, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder.
hmm,
And I know that was 2 years before I actually started writing this, but it felt pretty close to when I started writing it. And, there was all of this like trying to go to different doctors, getting different tests, medication trials, all of that stuff. And, all of these doctors kept saying to me that, we are seeing these huge numbers of autoimmune, this rise in our country of autoimmune disorders, and
hmm,
particularly in women. But then when I would read books, I couldn't really find characters that were dealing with some of the things that I was. And so I really was craving, some characters that were going through. Plus, we were in the middle of a pandemic too. How could I
mhm.
not think about illness and bodies and
And bodies and yeah. Well, and you've written about the pandemic and how that, you know, I guess sort of correct me if I'm wrong, but either exacerbated or triggered a bit of a writer's block in
yeah,
you, but
yeah,
community kind of pulled you out,
yeah,
became a way out of that. And of course, I've mentioned all the organizations you're a part of, which is a form of community.
yeah.
Sometimes we do virtual writing retreats together with other writers. That's a form of community. We've worked together on writers' workshops, another form of community. Your teaching is a form of community.
Mhm.
I'm sure you have plenty of other circles and communities. So I'm really curious about how community helped pull you out of um, the
Yeah.
writer's block.
Yeah, so pre-pandemic, if you would have asked me, I would have told you that I'm a writer who works on my own. Like, I don't work with I just sit in my little corner and I write my books. And and then the pandemic hit, and wow, I mean, it was almost like stopping time. Like, I had a really hard time writing anything, like emails even. Like, it was a really difficult situation of like, and it was almost like overwhelmed, like I didn't know where to start. And so I had to ask from at least two, I think I think there might have been three times that I had to ask for an extension on my contract for this book because I was behind. I was really, really behind
Yeah.
and had very little. Um, but once everybody was really in this position of being in their homes, and when Zoom groups started forming and holding, like you would go into a Zoom room and everybody would just be writing their own thing. I started going to those frequently, and it didn't matter to me who was holding it. It could have been like romance writers who were having it. I didn't care. But I found that like I really need a human being to make me accountable. Because
Mhm.
I'm just not good at holding myself accountable. But if I have somebody else who's even just, if I even know that they're working at the same time, that helps me.
Mhm.
Um, but I found these Zoom rooms, and that was really, really helpful because it held me to my computer because my camera was on, they could see me, But then there was also like the timed writing aspect of it too. And so I don't know. I don't This book never would have been written if it wouldn't have been for like Zoom rooms and people who are there. And I have a really good friend who we live on, completely separate sides of, the country, but one thing that really grew out of the pandemic was we started meeting every Sunday, and then sometimes whenever we can make it work during the week. For a while, we were meeting on Tuesday, Thursday, and Sundays. And, that has been such a help just to have somebody else to say, "Hey, what did you do? What did you write about? Have you written anything? And we're going to leave our cameras on for an hour and let's see what we can do." Um,
Yeah.
I would never have said that I needed that, but pre-pandemic, but now I definitely do. And I need friends like Erin Flanagan and you guys to be like, show us your list of goals.
Yes, I love that Erin does that.
Yes.
Yeah, Meredith is referring to Erin Flanagan, who has her first uh, novel, and it's a mystery
Yeah.
called Deer Season out. And yes, she's very good at keeping us accountable, making us set goals, and she even gives us stickers in her daytimer on our behalf. You got to love a person like
Yeah.
that. But I think that's really insightful to kind of have discovered that about yourself and
Yeah.
to um, go, okay, that's fine. So I have this. If I have this accountability, then I will get the work done, and
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, you're still writing alone in the sense of
Mhm. Yeah.
you're doing the writing, but just knowing, um, yeah, somebody else. I think just knowing somebody else is also
Right.
doing the writing, um, and that you're accountable. It does make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, so you mentioned, I've mentioned that you teach, and you've talked about it a little bit. How do you balance um, teaching with writing? That's a lot to me. That's a lot to juggle. So for
Yeah.
those of us who struggle with time management,
Well,
well,
I'm very
how do you do that?
oh gosh, there are so many times that I don't do well with it. And the idea that that you have to write every day, I wish I could write every day, but I just don't really have time. And it one of the things that I try really hard to do is to use my summers to generate like drafts, like first drafts. And
Mhm.
that's when I like am making all of my shitty first drafts is over summer. And what I found is that I can edit during the semester when I'm teaching a lot easier than I can be generating material. So, and then over breaks and things like that is when I work on revisions. So for me, that has worked. And, I kind of got myself into a pickle a little bit here with this book. And I was writing in the fall while I was also teaching. And that was really, really difficult to do. Um, Hopefully, I can plan a little bit better in the future and not have to do that. But it is, teaching is all encompassing in a lot of
Mhm.
ways. And it just, I love it. And I learn so much from students and from teaching, but it also takes away a lot of time from. what could be writing, you know?
Yeah, I understand. And yet it forces,
Yeah.
it's like having those Zoom rooms. It forces you to focus. You have to make this decision. This is
Yep.
what I'm doing with my summer. This is the phase of writing I will be in. So,
Right.
you know, I think that's encouraging in its own way. So when you're teaching your creative writing students or giving workshops, are there like top three maybe tips that you would give writers who are maybe starting out or need to restart, or what kind of tips do you like to give to other writers?
I think it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the scope of what you're trying to do. And, you know, as a writer, we have an idea. We might not know how we're going to get to this point, but we have an idea of what we want this thing to look like. And it can be really overwhelming once you really start to try to get to that point. Um, and so, my biggest piece of advice is sort of breaking things down into chunks if you can,
Hmm.
and working in little pieces to try to put it together. And you know, even though I'm more of a pantser writer, I usually try to help people in my classes try to plan a little bit before they actually sit down to write. And I know that's completely opposite of what I do, but I think that like for beginning writers, it helps to have a little bit of a roadmap um, to get through. And I would never advise anyone to do what I did with this book, which was just keep revising and revising and revising over and time. I mean, hopefully for my next book, I'm going to do more planning. So, but definitely, I would say planning or doing some sort of outlining or planning, even if it's just, you know, doing chapter outlines. You know, there's so many things out there that can really help on the internet that have like ways of organization and things like that. But yeah, that and this feeling of overwhelm, I think that it can be exciting, but it can also be so fearful that it holds people in place.
Yeah, it can be paralyzing.
Yeah.
I need a roadmap.
Yeah.
I don't think, you know, most, maybe some people do need a point by point outline of the whole thing. But I'm kind of somewhere in the middle. I need a
Yeah.
little bit of infrastructure. And I think, you know, you have published all these books and written lots of stories and essays and articles. So you're probably at some level
Doing it.
planning is subconsciously. And I think you're right. I think, especially for new writers, maybe doing it a little more consciously at first is
Mhm.
better. Yeah. So those are great tips. Well, what's next? What are you working on now? Are you taking a break?
Well, I'm not really taking yeah, I don't know if I'm taking a break or not. I don't think I'm really taking a break. So I found that like one of the things that's been really helpful to me like over my holiday break and then into this semester has been I've been working on an essay and two short stories.
Mm,
And it's been sort of like this create like palette cleanser, even though they're
hmm.
all, you know, are still gritty themselves. It's been kind of like it's been a good break from writing a novel.
Yeah.
Um, so that's been really nice to do. That's so, you know, I'm sure that, you know, like summer will be coming soon, hopefully. I don't know, looking at snow outside. But
It'll get here.
yeah, it'll get here and I'm hoping to have a plan for a novel to start at the beginning of summer, but yeah, that's just what where I'm at. But
Yeah.
congratulations to you on the Echoes. Your book's coming out like
Oh,
right when mine is.
yes. Yeah. We're coming out in this before mine, and then yeah, the Echoes comes out March 29th. Thank you for mentioning that. So that'll
Yes.
be fun. You know, we'll just, you know, March will be our mutual book birthday,
Yes,
our
absolutely.
book birth.
Yeah.
So, well, I forgot to ask you, do you have a mug of tea or coffee
Ooh,
or
you know what? So I'm not really a hot drinker of any kind, but oh wait, sorry, I keep doing it the opposite way. I
yeah,
am a cold drinker and I love
yeah,
sugar. So Mountain Dew is my
your
drink of
go-to.
choice.
That is awesome.
What about you?
I'm having my tea in my little tea mug. So it's tea with Jess and Mountain Dew with Meredith. I think that works perfectly. I love it. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to everyone who's watched live, and thank you to people who watch the recording later or catch the podcast version, available on all your favorite podcast apps. And thank you,
Thank
Meredith, for
you.
doing the
I
book.
really had fun. Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, take care, be kind to yourselves and each other, and I'll see you next week for Tea with Jess.
Bye.